naturalist at Interstate State Park when I started my career, Wild River State Park when I retired, volunteering since I retired. That pretty well sums it up. So I want to get right into the presentation, and it's going to take me just a moment to get the screen share started. And that should do it. So you should be seeing a slide of our house. Lexington Parkway Passive House is a useful handle to remember because you can look online. On YouTube, there's a channel of construction videos that I shot in time lapse and also an overview of construction as a slideshow. And if you do a general web search on Lexington Parkway Passive House, you will also get as a search result our designers page about the project. So that's some additional information that you could look for. And I'm gonna adjust something here. Yeah, that's what I want. So the house is a really, really good experience for us. Just by way of introduction, I'm going to say I don't ever want to build a house again because it's an incredible amount of work to do the planning and the coordination and to ride herd on the contractor and make sure that things get done right. And so we're really glad that that part's over, and we're really glad that we're living here now because it's a really great house and it's in a really great location. From there, I want to go to project goals. Our main goal going in, and this is all generated as part of the planning process with our designers. They wanted a statement of goals from us because they wanted to create something that was suitable for what we were thinking about. So we had as a top goal, low energy consumption, minimal carbon dioxide operating cost, and if possible, keep that operating cost on an annual basis, keep it down to zero, which means we have to generate power in exchange for the power that we use. And we'll get into that in a little bit. Second goal, equally important, is we want to be able to live in this house for as long as possible. We want to age in place. So we want no barriers to our use of the house if we become disabled. And so the house has a great deal of disability accessible design. We wanted to use materials with reduced environmental impact. It's just not possible to build something new without some environmental impact. But where we could make choices, we wanted to choose between, we wanted to choose the lesser carbon footprint or environmental impact materials. We definitely wanted ample natural light in all of our living spaces, and we got that. We wanted to have low maintenance for the house, preferably no repainting, preferably minimal difficulty in keeping the house clean, and so on, because we're not getting any younger and it's not getting any easier to do those things. We wanted to implement best management for retention of runoff from the lot. We're on a hill, and so the hillside going down to Lexington Parkway doesn't lend itself to retaining runoff, but we have some thoughts about that. But for the rest of the lot, the idea was in an average precipitation event, we wanted all of the runoff to be dealt with on the lot and not go into storm sewers. We wanted landscaping that had relatively low time cost to keep it maintained, relatively low energy cost, and relatively low material cost. So we're doing investment up front to make it that way. We haven't quite got there yet. We wanted the landscaping to be beneficial to the environment. We wanted to enhance habitat for wildlife and especially for pollinators. And this is the ironic thing. We completed the project right about the time that the COVID shutdown happened. And so we have not been able to provide tours and outreach, but we want this project to be a good example for other people and to inspire them to do whatever they can in the direction that we're headed. They can't tackle, potentially, it's going to be difficult to tackle an entire project at the scale that we did it, but we can sure give a lot of inspiration to people who want to do bits and pieces and improve things. So we decided that the certification standard that we wanted to go for is the Passive House certification, which is originally a European building standard that's now also implemented in the United States. And it's primarily designed around, built around energy efficiency, minimizing the energy needed to heat and cool a building. And it's not limited to residential buildings or to single residential buildings. It can also be apartment buildings, multiple unit housing, office buildings, educational buildings. The passive house compliant buildings can be made for all of those purposes. In the United States, there are two organizations that will provide passive house certification. One of them is the Passive House Institute US, and the other one is just plain Passive House Institute. And they are actually headquartered in Europe. And the reason I'm saying this is if you afterward look up Passive House, you're going to find information that may come from one or the other of these two organizations. They are both aiming for the same goal, but they use slightly different tools and standards for determining whether a project meets their certification or not. We elected to go with the second one, Passive House Institute, partially because that's the original, but also because our designer is German and was very familiar with the Passive House standard in Europe. And that's what the Passive House Institute does. In fact, we learned how to spell it in German. It still says Passive House Institute. It's just spelled differently. Our designer is TE Studio. Tim Ian is the principal designer. Stefan Tanner is his partner in the business. There's an interesting small world connection with our selection of that studio that I'll get to in a little bit. So they did the overall structure and the energy efficiency design. And then for interior design and for accessibility, we had Debbie Slachter from Slachter Design Studio advise us on finishes and on compliance with disability accessibility. So going to the small world thing, I was, from the time that I first saw an earth-sheltered passive solar home, I was doodling plans on notepaper for a house that I wanted to build someday, inspired quite a bit by the manager's residence at Wild River State Park, which is a good example of 1970s state-of-the-art, low energy consumption construction. And as a result of that inspiration, when I had my own property in Wisconsin and got tired of living in a converted garage that I turned into a cabin, I built an honest-to-goodness house, which incorporated a lot of the principles of earth-sheltered passive solar. The name Oak House comes from all of the siding and sheathing lumber is rough cut oak from a sawmill that was located about 10 miles from where I built that house. So definitely locally sourced materials. And a lot of window space facing south. We're looking at the south aspect of that house. And it performed very nicely. I wanted thick walls, so I had 12-inch thick insulated walls, maybe 18 inches of insulation under the roof. And in the fall and winter, I didn't really need to use supplemental heating because solar warming was sufficient to keep the house heated. During the winter, I burned wood. It was very, very comfortable. When I married Diane, we settled on White Bear Lake as a location where we both wanted to live. And we bought a 1950s Rambler and lived in that. And pretty much from the get-go on living there, I was thinking in terms of, this house isn't very energy efficient. I would sure like to do something. I would like to build something that would be more energy efficient. But I didn't have a clear vision about what that would be. I just wanted to do it. And then in the 1990s, one of the conferences of Minnesota State Park Naturalists took place at the Concordia Language Villages near Bemidji. And one of the structures there was on a tour that we naturalists took together, and that was the Valtze Biohaus Environmental Living Center, which is a combination classroom and dormitory building. That building is the first passive house certified building or passive certified residence to be built in the United States. And as a result of the tour and the introduction I got to passive house building principles, it was obviously the answer for what I was looking for. So how do we go about designing a house that really does the best job of being sustainable to maintain? The principles for passive house construction, there are 5 main ingredients. Good thermal insulation, windows that are very high performance in terms of retaining temperature between the inside and the outside, very good ventilation, which does heat recovery so that you're not suffering from poor air quality indoors, but you're also not having huge amounts of indoor and outdoor air exchanging with each other and compromising the comfortable environmental envelope of heating and cooling that you maintain inside. Air tightness, which just means you control all of the air infiltration into and out of the building so that it all goes through that heat recovery ventilation system. And reducing thermal bridges, so you don't have structural elements of the building that run all the way from the inside to the outside so that those don't conduct heat in either direction. So for our house, we ended up with 18-inch thick walls with insulation, and the insulation under the roof is thicker than that. I can't say exactly how thick. It varies from place to place, but it's super insulated. That's just the quickest way to describe it. And as far as air tightness, there's a test called the blower door test. We had that done 3 times during construction. It measures the amount of exchange of air between the inside and the outside. And there is a code requirement for how airtight a new constructed house has to be. And from this blower door test, we discovered that the passive house design and the real attention to keeping the house airtight paid off, because our house exceeded the code standard by 6 times. So we have 1/6 or less of the amount of air exchange between the indoors and outdoors that doesn't go through our heat recovery ventilation system. Thermal bridge reduction, possibly the best example of how that's implemented in the house that we're living in, is looking at this photo of the frost footings. The house does not have a basement, so even though this looks like a half-height basement, it all got filled in level with grade when it was completed. The Frost footings have insulation underneath them. They have insulation on the inside of them. They have insulation on the outside of them. There is no point at which the footings that the house rests on actually contact the outside environment. So the entire house is basically in an envelope of insulation. It is even taken to the extreme of, at spots where sidewalks come up to the house to a doorway, the insulation is notched out for that sidewalk to run right up to the wall of the house and to the door. And there's a little inset piece of insulation that still isolates the concrete slab of the sidewalk from the interior structure of the house. So no places where heat can be transferred without having to go through at least some insulation. The exceptions being utility entries like plumbing, electrical, sewer, their ventilation openings. Those run all the way from inside to outside, and door handles, door thresholds, things like that. But it's relatively minimal compared to conventional construction. The windows, that's a pretty big story, which I'm not going to tell in its entirety, but the typical triple pane window that you can buy from a manufacturer in the United States has an energy performance and insulation value of R5, which is considered very good performance by US window manufacturers. We ended up having to get windows shipped from Europe because we could not meet passive house standards with any US made windows. So we ordered our windows from Germany, and they perform twice as well as the best window that you can get from a US manufacturer, R10 or better. So yeah, there's a story about how long it took the windows to get here and what happened on the way, but let's skip that for now. Ventilation, we have this octopus tangle of air piping in our laundry room, which is basically a heat recovery ventilator. These are code required in all new construction, but in a passive house, they are far more crucial because a passive house is so much better sealed. What I can say about this is there's one silver foil coated duct that exhausts air from inside the house to the outside. There's another silver foil coated air duct that brings outside air into the house. And then there's this tangle of spaghetti up above the manifold, above the heat exchanger, which routes outside air to all of the living spaces and takes stale inside air out of rooms like the bathrooms and the kitchen and the workroom. And it exchanges the heat and the humidity in the air during that process so that the indoor air and the outdoor air are basically kept as separate as possible, and the indoor comfort is kept as sustainable and constant as possible. Our designer said that in terms of indoor air quality, what this unit provides is the equivalent that you would get if you opened every window in your house for half an hour, every window and every door in your house for half an hour every 3 hours. So basically, the house is very well ventilated. The air quality indoors is essentially the same as the air quality outdoors. And so it's extremely comfortable and extremely comforting to know that. I have lived in or spent time in houses that were not really good for indoor air quality, where toxic fumes from plastic flooring, for instance, were very evidently present. Air quality was not good. This home, on the other hand, is exceedingly healthy in that respect. Another component of passive house design is that the heating fuel source is entirely electricity. So we do not burn any natural gas. We don't have a wood stove. We don't have a fireplace. All of our heating and cooling is done with electricity. And that gives a benefit to the air tightness, because if you do have something that burns a fuel in your house. You need fresh combustion air to feed that combustion, and you need to vent the combustion gases out of the house, which means you've got two holes in your house that are connecting indoor and outdoor air. And that's not a good thing. So with an all-electric house, it becomes fairly easy, at least in terms of the technology, to produce enough electricity to replace the amount that you use. We are on the grid, but we produce from a rooftop solar array approximately the same amount of electricity every year that we use every year. And we have almost literally lived in the house for exactly 1 year. And I just did the calculation yesterday. And it turns out that when you take the graph of our production, anything that's below the zero line on this graph is a month in which we made more energy than we used. And anything that's above the zero line on this graph is a month, October, November, January, February, March, wait, pardon me, November, December, January, February, March. The labels on the chart are a little off because this came from Excel. The balance is that we ended up coming within 5% of producing the same amount of electricity in 1 year as we used in 1 year. And we can probably tweak that and probably get it to the point where we are feeding as much energy into the grid in a year as we take off of the grid in a year. So we'll be a net zero house for carbon dioxide emissions from electrical generation. As of yesterday, the lifetime generation of this solar array has been 12.4 megawatt hours, which is nothing compared to a high-powered electrical plant, but it's all that we need for running the house for a year. And that translates into an equivalent of avoiding about 10 tons of carbon dioxide emission, or the equivalent of planting 145 trees. So we're happy about that. And because of this level of performance, which was calculated ahead of time by our designer, our house does meet the Passive House certification standard. That makes us the first house in the city of St. Paul that meets Passive House standard. There are a couple in Minneapolis, there are others around the Midwest. And then because we do produce virtually as much electricity as we consume, we meet the Passive House Plus standard. And we are, in the United States, we are only the second single family dwelling to meet that standard. So we're cutting edge, very definitely. We didn't necessarily set out to prove that we could do that, but we're really happy that we did. And so we are hopefully an example of the future. We are hopefully showing that conservation, keeping energy costs down by not using the energy, is part of the solution to resolving climate change and fossil fuel problems. We can't do it just by converting to all electric, to all solar or all wind or all renewable, and still maintain the level of consumption that we're doing, because our energy grid can't handle that. What we need to do is to reduce the consumption at every level we can. And home heating and cooling is a huge chunk of that. So we're happy to be part of the solution. Moving on to aging in place and accessible design. As I said, we want to be able to live here essentially until we die. We would love to die in this house. We don't want to do that soon, but if we have to do it, we want to do it here. So all of our entries are grade level. So it's easy to get in and out of the house with a wheelchair or a walker. There's no steps to go up. This is really convenient just for moving things in and out of the house when we are fully able. And as our ability declines with age, it's going to be a real blessing for us. And it's already been a blessing for the few guests that we've been able to have. during construction, at least, we were able to have people in for tours because that was before COVID. We also have a wheelchair-friendly access out onto an exterior balcony. And in that same shot, I wanted to show off this screen is actually an accordion fold screen that retracts into the right-hand jamb of the patio door so that you can completely move it out of the way when you want to go in and out, or you can completely close it so that you can keep bugs out when you want to have ventilation. Another component for us was that we wanted to have everything in the house be easy to manipulate. And so all of our window hardware, door hardware, cabinet hardware, all of our light switches, all of our plumbing fixtures are American with Disability Act compliant, ADA compliant, so that regardless of what disability we might end up with as we age, we will hopefully be in a position to be able to continue to live in the house. There are some features which we will have to modify. For instance, sinks that currently have cabinets underneath them. If one of us ends up needing a wheelchair, then we're going to need to remove those cabinets so that we can get the wheelchair right up to the sink. But the house is designed so those cabinets can be removed. So it's a relatively easy conversion to make. And we do have an elevator. We have a conventional stairway, and right up the middle of the stairwell, there's an enclosed elevator shaft. That has not gotten a lot of use. It makes a handy closet. We've had, before COVID, we had at least one person who was not able to negotiate the stairs, who was able to get upstairs because we had the elevator. And we've used it to move furniture, which is a real handy thing too. So we're happy to have it. And now we're into reduced environmental impact materials. And that story actually starts with the house that was on the lot when we bought the lot back in, it was around the end of 2011 when we found this lot. We had given up on trying to find a vacant lot in Ramsey County. We wanted a location that was close to our place of worship. And in Ramsey County, there are just not very many vacant lots. So we started looking at lots with older homes that we didn't feel too bad about doing a tear down on. And we looked at a lot of unsuitable locations where there were houses that were literally derelict, and it would have been a blessing to get them torn down. But they were right next to high-rise apartment buildings, and that didn't seem to be a very convivial neighborhood, and does not have really good solar input for passive solar warming or solar electric generation. So we ended up looking further afield. We happened across this house, and we had our designer come out and check the solar aspect of the lot and the expected warming and electrical generation that we could get on the lot. And he said, yeah, this would be a good lot. So we bought it. And instead of having the house torn down and put into a landfill, we had it disassembled, deconstructed. So all of the masonry, all of the brick, all of the concrete, all of the cinder block got taken away and ground up into aggregate for concrete. So that reduces the amount of new gravel that has to be mined for concrete production. We had as much of the wood and interior fixtures, doors, and so on. We saved those, and ultimately we didn't end up using most of them. The doors mostly went to Habitat for Humanity. The lumber mostly went to the Franconia's Culture Garden. We did end up using a little bit of it to panel 2 walls of our workroom. So we still have some traces of the prior home in our present home. We also used some of the cabinet hardware from that home in our workroom. And the appliances went to a needy family in Minneapolis. Altogether, 70% of the mass of the original house was repurposed. So only 30% ended up having to go to a landfill. New materials, we specified that all of the wood in the house we wanted to be certified as sustainable. And so all of it, a little bit was Forest Sustainability Council, FSC certified, but most of it was Sustainable Forestry Initiative certified. So comes from forests that are managed for steady production of new wood products and steady harvesting instead of cutting virgin timber. Concrete has a big carbon dioxide footprint because the Portland cement that is the binder in concrete is made using a tremendous amount of heat. And so our designers said, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to put something in there to replace as much of that Portland cement as possible. Fly ash is a waste product from coal burning power plants. And it turns out to be a dandy binder if you mix it 50-50 with Portland cement when you make concrete. So our concrete has 50% or more fly ash in it, which reduces the carbon footprint quite a lot. Our siding, we have two different materials, the green steel. Steel, of course, has a carbon footprint, but the advantage to us, since we wanted something that would last a long time and require no maintenance, steel was an ideal product for that. And a benefit of steel that is above and beyond a lot of other siding options is that, first of all, it has a very long operating life, probably a human lifetime or better. And second of all, at the end of that operating life, it's 100% recyclable, which cannot be said for any number of other siding materials. And then the second type of siding, you see the wood that's been used in certain locations as kind of a highlight. That wood is all ash from trees that were taken down because of emerald ash borer. It's been heat treated, so there's a little bit of carbon footprint in that. And the heat treatment makes it weather resistant. So essentially it never needs to be painted, never needs to be sealed, never needs to be stained. So basically we were using the end product of a huge amount of material that was being generated because of emerald ash borer, and there was no market for it. We became part of the market. For floor materials, we used sustainable materials. On the left, the foreground, that's a floating tile cork floor. Cork is a renewable resource that can be sustainably harvested, and ours was. The carpeting beyond it is wool. That's a renewable resource. The backing for the carpet is not a synthetic material. It's jute fiber. And again, a renewable resource and no volatile organic compounds being emitted from it as it decays. On the right, we've got linoleum for the kitchen floor, also for the part of the workroom floor. Linoleum is made from basically pulverized wood and jute and linseed oil. So again, all renewable resources. And then the tile for the high traffic areas like the bathrooms and the entryways, that is also a relatively sustainable material. Probably the biggest energy cost in that is shipping it. And I am not sure how far that tile had to come from. And I'm just going to skip that part in this talk because I really don't know. But it's, again, zero volatile organic compounds, lifetime that is probably multiple human lifetimes before it needs to be replaced, and it's 100% recyclable. The insulation in the walls and under the roof is all dense pack cellulose, which is derived from recycled newspaper. It has a good R value. The walls, being 18 inches thick, are plenty well insulated. This photo is actually in the garage. We have the garage insulated in addition to having the house insulated, with a view towards the potential future use of, well, that could be an extra room for somebody if we get the cars out of there. Or also it it has the potential to even be a detached residence if the city of St. Paul would ever say that it was okay to do that. They made us state that we would not do that, otherwise they wouldn't have given us a permit to have sewer and water connections to the garage, but we do have those, so we're ready to go if we ever want to convert it to living space. We wanted a lot of natural light in the house, and that goes hand in hand with passive solar heating. The whole south facade of the house, which was the first slide, the Lexington Parkway Passive House slide, there's a large amount of south-facing glass, and that's where you get the greatest solar energy gain during the winter months when the sun is low. And we did find that it was very comfortable being in those rooms. We had the thermostat set to 68 degrees. For sunny days, the heat basically stopped running as soon as the sun warmed up the space, and it didn't start running again until a while after sundown. Spring and fall, it's pretty much been unnecessary to heat the house, except for this cloudy cold stretch that we're having right now. And so we're happy with that, and we're happy with the amount of natural light. We don't have to turn on light fixtures in order to see what we're doing. All of the hallways, all of the workspaces, all of the living space have natural illumination. The only rooms that don't have it are storage closets. Those windows also give us an extraordinary view. We're very fortunate to find a lot that has a view of the Como Golf Course. I would rather have it have a view of something like a state park, but as golf courses, they do use more fertilizer and chemicals than I wish they did, but they are not using as much as they used to. And as far as the view quality, it's all green during the growing season. And if you can ignore Lexington Parkway being at the bottom of the hill between us and the golf course, it's kind of like living in the country, which is, like I said, a real blessing. You can imagine with an expanse of windows like that there would be a concern about bird collisions. And because of that, I decided that I really wanted to pay the extra to get bird-friendly glass for those windows. We didn't do it in all of the windows in the house, but the big ones in the main room of the house have, on the outer pane, there's an ultraviolet pigment that's added to the glass that is in kind of a spider web pattern, which, because it's ultraviolet and because birds' eyes can see ultraviolet, it warns them that that's not a good place to try and fly. And for us humans, we can't see ultraviolet pigment. We can see a little bit of a refraction difference from the outside if the light is at just the right angle. So we can make out that spiderweb pattern, but the view from inside, you can't tell that there's anything on that glass. So it's quite a good product. And it seems to be working. We have not had substantial number of bird collisions. We seemed to have a cluster of them in the fall before we moved into the house. And many of those, I would say most of those, were on windows that did not have this treatment. And since then, we've had very few. So I can't tell you from our experience that this window system really reduces bird collisions, but other projects that have used this kind of glass have reported substantial reductions in bird impacts. So I'm happy that we made that choice. And because of the huge windows, we wanted to have, in fact, to meet passive house specifications, we had to have exterior blinds. They sit outside of the outer pane of the window. They're remotely operated by electricity. We can roll them down when we want to reduce the amount of solar intake so that we don't heat up the interior more than we want to. And we can slat them just like Venetian blinds so that we can have them rolled down, but we can see between the slats, or we can roll them all the way up. That also gives us privacy. And there's a story with the blinds too, but I won't go into that. We'll move on to manage runoff. The idea was, let's keep every drop of rain that falls on the lot if we can. And to do that, we installed, or we planned, 4 rain gardens, which between them all take all of the runoff from the building roofs and from all of the paved surfaces and put it into a settling basin where it soaks into the ground. So basically, apart from the hillside, the entire precipitation that falls on the lot stays on the lot. I'm going to be looking at that hillside in the coming years and try and get a feel for how much of the rain that falls on it soaks in before it gets to the gutter and how much of it actually does get to the gutter. And we'll be looking at ways to put some structural alterations, just a little bit of grading difference on that slope can greatly reduce the amount of water that's going to go into storm sewers. The rain gardens are, I would have to say they are at a very early stage yet. This is last year at the peak of the growing season. I put in all of the plants with the help of a couple of friends on a couple of the rain gardens. And the gardens are still pretty much just, bare soil. The plants don't cover up much, but each year I expect the plants to occupy more and more soil, and I can always supplement. I can always put more plants in. So I'm happy with the gardens from the perspective of water retention, but I'm also happy with them because we used native plants, and that means that we've been getting pollinators come into those gardens. So here's a common eastern bumblebee, here's a green sweat bee. The one real regret at moving out of our 1950s Rambler in White Bear Lake is that we spent 27 years making the yard of that house into a wildlife paradise, and we left it behind. I documented over 200 species of pollinating insects visiting flowers in that yard. And so far in 1 year living here, I've only documented 30 some in this lot. But it's like a new restaurant. We've only just opened. We haven't hit our stride yet. Word hasn't gotten around. It's going to be very interesting, I think, to see over the years how the diversity of pollinators increases as a result of the landscaping changes that we're making. And we've had other wildlife as well. We've created rock shelters for our chipmunks because they are real characters. And we've had white-tailed deer. We've had way too many rabbits. We've had a lot of serenades from coyotes recently because they're beginning to move into the Como Park area. And hopefully there'll be a deterrent for the rabbits. There's at least one pair of great horned owls that hunts over this area also, and that's a good rabbit deterrent. And we're considering maybe putting up a raptor perch to see if we can get some additional help controlling the rabbits, but I'm concerned that that might also help us control chipmunks. And we really don't have too many chipmunks at this point, so I don't want to reduce that population. Overall, I want to reduce our landscape maintenance a lot more than it is right now. This is the slope going down towards Lexington Parkway, and it's virtually all turf grass. It has to be mowed periodically in order to keep up appearances. And we're using an electric battery-powered lawnmower that's charged off of basically our solar panels. So we're not emitting horrible fumes by mowing the lawn, but I'd like to reduce that a lot more. And so long run, we want to do more and more turf removal and replacement with gardens. So a quick look at an overall plan for what I'm hoping we'll be able to accomplish this year. The darker green circles are existing trees. The hatched circles are trees that we intend to plant this year or shrubs that we intend to plant this year to add to what's here already. The gardens that are already in, the rain gardens and a garden alongside the driveway are shown in paler green, and this kind of greenish mist area, that's future garden. The first part of that out towards the street, I want to put that in this year, and then I want to keep expanding it year by year until it's much larger. And I want to get a lot more garden space in on this slope because running a lawnmower on a slope is not fun. And because we want people driving by to look at the yard and say, hey, I could do that with my yard too. Um, in fact, as far as being a good example, we already have our sign out saying we are planting pollinator habitat. And as a result, we've got 3 neighbors right now who are either installing or planning to install native plant gardens to benefit pollinators. And I think that will spread. I'm definitely going to work on making it spread. As far as tours, as I said, our intention was to have tours to show off the house as a great example, but COVID has interrupted that. However, as COVID becomes less severe a problem because more and more people get vaccinated, we will hopefully be able to start having in-house tours with human beings in person. So we're looking forward to that. And with that, I want to say that's the presentation, and I want to give you a chance to ask questions. But remember to unmute before you speak.
Yes, thank you, Dave, so much. Wow. That's an amazing, what an inspiration. Some of you I had to mute, so you might need me to unmute you. If you do have a question, I don't see anything in the chat, but I know they'll be coming in. Or people, like Dave said, just unmute with your questions. And so how long was your planning process for this? I guess I've been wondering. I know you started kind of 2011, so almost 10 years there, right?
Right, yeah. We bought the house, the lot with the house on it around the cusp of 2011, 2012. We started conversations with our designer. We didn't like the ideas that he presented us with at first. We decided, okay, we better get a firmer idea of what we really do want so we can present him with that. And that took us a year or 2. And then we started rolling on initial design. And there was one point at which we thought, this is moving a little faster than we're prepared for. So we shut things down for a bit and then we restarted again. All in all, the planning process was at least 6-7 years, and some planning still going on even during the early parts of construction. And then the build, I guess you could say, let's see, we broke ground in 1998 in July, and we moved in 1998, 2018 in July, and we moved in 2020 in April, so close to 2 years.
Wow, that's a long time to be in that kind of process.
The build would not have taken as long if there hadn't been a few hitches, and those were some of the stories that I declined to tell because I didn't want this to go on too long.
Well, that's for when you come to a Birds and Beer and you can have 2 beers and tell us all about it. How's that?
Yeah. Yeah, feel free to phone me up or drop me an email if you want any particulars.
So potentially you'll be giving tours in 2022, right? And
potentially.
And you have a website. I wonder if you want to talk about that a little bit.
Sure. Yeah, it's essentially, it's a YouTube channel, and you can find it most easily simply by browsing to YouTube, and then in their search box, type in Lexington Parkway Passive House, and you will get a hit on our channel, and you can watch all the videos. There's a playlist, or you can pick and choose among the videos. And there's also a link on that channel to our designer's project page for this project.
And your designer is from Germany, lives in Germany?
Originally from Germany, lives in the US.
Okay.
Actually, a little ironically, he only built himself and his family a passive certified house after ours got started. So he's now living in a passive house and he loves it.
Is he in the Midwest?
Yes, he's in Minneapolis. So I think he may be the 3rd passive house certified house in Minneapolis.
I didn't realize they were there. You know, the solar community has a solar house tour every year. Well, maybe not during COVID, but that would be interesting, perhaps a passive house tour as well.
I think that there is a means and an effort underway to get video tours ready for that particular event. And I think we will be a part of that.
That would be great. Because I don't know about anybody else, but I haven't really heard any of Passive House very much in the States being promoted. So it's really great what you're doing.
It's very popular in Europe. And here we know we've got LEED certification, which is more of a US product. And I think of Passive House as being the European equivalent, although they aim for slightly different things. Passive House is primarily energy conservation, and the other components that are in LEED, the energy conservation is not as strict as Passive House, but there are building material components to getting LEED certified. And we hopefully met those. We could actually have gone for multiple certification, but each certification costs extra. So we just went with one.
Yeah. Would you be LEED platinum, you think?
We probably could make LEED platinum. I know on the energy, we definitely would. On the materials and on the landscaping, I think we could do it also. And then there's Minnesota Green Star, which also takes landscaping into account. We did have to remove 5 mature hardwood trees from the site in order to be able to build the project. Some of the trees would have been inside the house otherwise. And unfortunately, some of them would have been in the way of construction equipment because our lot is a very strange shape. And so we had a very narrow entry area for everything to stage through, and trees in that entry area would have been a big problem.
I've got a tour group for you. My son's environmental science class at Como Park. They could practically walk over and see you.
Absolutely. Well, next year, maybe we'll be free of restrictions.
I have a question, and then I don't know if others have their hands up. I can't see everyone. But you mentioned on your lawnmower about plugging it in. Now, I understand that you're actually on the grid. So you're, so do you have like a battery system or something?
That's, yeah. The battery system is actually kind of incidental because the arrangement we have with Excel is that we stay connected to the grid, they buy our surplus, and then we buy from them if we don't generate enough. But we installed a single battery pack, not enough to take us off the grid, but enough that if the grid went down and it was cloudy, we could still operate the refrigerator and some lights, probably for half a week or more if we're conservative about how we use the electricity.
I
Thanks.
wonder.
That was a selfish question because I was thinking the same. We have a solar system, but having that battery in the basement for that, instead of a generator or something like that might be useful. But yeah, sounds like what you have.
Yep.
I was wondering. I'm sure this wasn't all Walmart Costco cost savings, and so I wonder if you were able to get grants of any kind. I know for like the stormwater part, that's the world I'm working in these days. I know there's probably grants you got for that, and maybe solar rewards, Excel's program or something.
Yeah, we qualified for Excel's solar rewards program. So in addition to the tax write-off that we got for installing solar, we're also getting some payments from Excel because we're selling them green energy, and that's helping them meet their goals for green energy production. And you're right, we got a grant for the rain gardens from the Capital Region Watershed District. So they drew up the plans and provided the planting lists and provided not a big chunk of the cost of installing the gardens. It was enough to cover the plants and more. And that was a real treat for us. I really appreciate that.
Yeah. I think sometimes it helps to have those incentives. It's kind of extra work to have to go after those grants, but also can help inspire other people maybe on this on this meeting to also search out grants for doing that next step.
Yes, it's definitely worth seeing what's out there. And I don't know, I mean, obviously you would be the person to talk to if you're in the business of of doing stormwater management grants, but I am also thinking, how about county extension? Would they be aware of grant programs? And who else? I'm not sure.
Right. And what about water saving technology? Like, do you have low flow toilets and
Yes.
the faucets? And we didn't really talk about water saving.
Yeah, I didn't talk about that, and that was my omission. All of the plumbing fixtures except for the utility sink in the workroom are low flow. And we also have a system to reduce our water consumption when we're waiting for hot water to get from the water heater to the tap. Instead of just running cold water down the drain, there is a recirculating system that we can turn on, which pumps the cold water back into the water heater and fills the line with warm water. And then you turn on the tap, and within seconds, you have hot water at the tap. But also, my wife instituted this, and I am proud of her for this. Vegetable wash water, rinsing water, a lot of things like that. We can't have a formal gray water system because it's not permitted within the Twin Cities, but that doesn't mean we can't have a container in the kitchen sink that we put vegetable rinse water into, and then we use that to water plants.
Yeah, that's true. I know that that's one of the issues that came up when the state plumbing code was getting revamped a couple years ago, and there was a lot of talk about trying to allow gray water systems to use the water from bathing and laundry and the kitchen sink, and be able to reuse that for flushing toilets, even something as simple as that.
Yeah.
It got a lot of resistance. So that may be something people, if you are into writing legislators, that you can start working on that, because water is going to be, one of the big issues. It is for most of the country and certainly out west, but for Minnesota, it's going to continue to be a big issue as precipitation patterns change. So if we can get that code changed to allow for gray water systems, it would be really a step forward.
I agree. And I will tell you, we ran into building code issues besides that. That's one of the stories, and I'll tell a brief version of it. The exterior shades that protect us against too much solar intake when we don't want it are a new product as far as the city electrical inspector was concerned. He had never seen anything like that. And similarly in Minneapolis, there are now 4 passive houses, or 3, that use the same kind of blinds. Every one of them has had to be an exception. They've had to go to some complicated process to get permission to put those blinds up. And for us, same thing happened. And ultimately we called our city council person, and she came out and she, heard our presentation and our designer's presentation, and she said, there's no reason why this should be a barrier. And our designer's point was your point exactly. We need to change the legislation. The legislation has to catch up with state-of-the-art building practices.
Yep. And that's a tough process. Yeah. All right. We have a story from your wife in the chat.
Yes.
It's a good story. I'll read it in case people are looking at the chat, but the designer, Tim Ian, one of the stories is that he was an anti-nuclear protester in Germany in the mid-1990s, and she was an anti-nuclear activist in Minnesota at the same time. And while he went on to become an environmentally efficient house designer, you found him at an environmental business fair in St. Paul and hired him before you found out that he was an anti-nuker as well. That's good. What was the environmental business fair? Was that the, what was it called? The Living Green Expo that they had for a while?
That sounds right. Yeah, it was about mid-2011. It was before we found this lot.
Yeah. And so,
I realized that I made a promise during the presentation that I was going to say, so what was this small world connection with the designer? And I realized that I neglected to say that Tim Ian's business partner, Stefan Tanner, was the principal designer of the BO house at Concordia Language Camp. I didn't know that at the time. I only knew it after we hired Tim Ian, and we hired Tim Ian because I had seen the BO house. So small world.
And Mr. Tanner now has the import business that imported these, fabulous floor to ceiling windows that we have in the house. And so all the windows and the doors are from his import business.
Other than a very warm thanks to you, Dave, and Diane as well, for sharing your night with us and talking to us.
Well, thank you for inviting us, and thank you all for being here.